The papers, I said, walk away clean. I had spent 11 years watching my brother turn every family gathering into a performance. He would show up late, blame traffic, kiss my mother on the cheek, and within 20 minutes somehow become the center of every conversation. He had a talent for it. The kind of talent that looks effortless until you realize how much invisible labor everyone else is doing just to keep the stage lit for him. My name is not important. What matters is that I was the one who stayed. When my father got sick, I was 26 and 3 months into a job I actually liked. I had a studio apartment in Columbus, a savings account I was proud of, and a plan, nothing elaborate, just a plan. I was going to stay at the job for 2 years, build up enough to move into a one-bedroom, maybe take a weekend trip somewhere I'd never been. The kind of life that doesn't photograph well but feels like yours. Then my father had his first stroke. My brother was in Phoenix at the time, doing something in sales that he described differently depending on who was asking. He flew in for 4 days, held my mother's hand in the hospital lobby, told everyone what a difficult time this was for him, and then flew back because he had commitments. I watched my mother nod and tell him she understood. I gave notice at my job 2 weeks later. I want to be honest about what those years were. They were not entirely without meaning. My father and I talked more in the last 3 years of his life than we had in the 31 years before it. I learned how he took his coffee, what he actually thought about the town he'd lived in for 40 years, the name of the girl he'd almost married before he met my mother. Those things mattered. But so did the logistics, the medication schedules, the insurance appeals, the twice monthly calls with the billing department at the hospital, the 3-hour round trip every time something needed to be filed in person because my parents' county still required original signatures on half of everything. My brother called on birthdays and sometimes on regular Tuesdays if the mood struck him, and on those calls he would say things like, "You're such a rock," and "I don't know what we'd do without you," and I would sit in my car in my parents' driveway and feel something that didn't have a clean name. My father died on a Thursday in November. It was quiet, which was what he had wanted. My brother flew in 2 days later, which was also what he had wanted, apparently. My parents owned a house, a real one, 4 bedrooms paid off in a neighborhood where the property values had done something interesting over the past decade. My father had also maintained a life insurance policy for 30 years, the kind that requires patience and regularity and the sort of long-term thinking that my brother had never been accused of. The estate value, when everything was added up, was just over $340,000. I found out what my mother had planned to do with it from my sister-in-law. Not from my mother, not from my brother. From his wife, who mentioned it at the kitchen table like she was commenting on the weather while I was washing dishes after the funeral reception. "It's so great that you'll be able to get back to your own life now," she said, "now that Darnell and I can take over the house situation." I turned off the faucet. "What do you mean?" I said. "Take over?" She looked at me with an expression I had seen before on people who realize mid-sentence that they have said something they weren't supposed to say. A small recalibration, a careful smoothing. "I just mean, you've done so much. It'll be nice for you to have a break." I dried my hands. I went back to the living room. I sat next to my mother and I asked her, very quietly, if she and I could talk sometime that week. Just the two of us. She said yes. She said of course. The conversation happened 4 days later. My brother was there, which was not what I had asked for, but I had learned by then that requests in my family had a way of getting edited in transit. My mother sat in the armchair that had been my father's. My brother sat on the couch like he owned it, which, as it turned out, was exactly how he was thinking about it. The plan, as they explained it, was that my brother and his wife would move into the house. They would manage the estate. The life insurance payout would go into a joint account with my mother to cover expenses. My brother said the word family 7 times in 12 minutes. I counted. "And what about me?" I asked. My mother looked at the floor. My brother said, "You'll always have a home here. That doesn't change. I want you to understand something." I was not surprised. That is the part that would have shocked the version of me from 10 years ago. Not that it was happening, but that I wasn't shocked. I had been paying attention for a long time. I had files. Literally, I had files. I had started keeping records 18 months into the caregiving arrangement, not because I knew I would need them, but because I was the kind of person who documents things when the situation feels unstable. Receipts, mileage logs, a spreadsheet of every medical appointment I had driven to, every pharmacy run, every hour spent on hold with Medicare. I had emails with timestamps. I had the Notes app on my phone, which I had started treating like a ledger. I also had something my brother did not know about. My father, in the last coherent months of his life, had asked me to help him draft a letter. He wanted to be clear, he said, about what he intended. He was not a complicated man about most things, but he was very clear about fairness. He had watched what I had given up. He wanted it acknowledged. The letter was not a legal document, but attached to it, signed and notarized, was an amendment to the original will, one that my father had asked his attorney to process 9 months before he died. The amendment specified that any individual who had served as primary caregiver for a period exceeding 12 consecutive months would receive a disproportionate share of the estate in recognition of that contribution. The language was his attorney's. The idea was my father's. I had not mentioned this to anyone, not to my mother, not to my brother. I had a copy in my apartment and a second copy with the attorney, and I had waited. My brother finished explaining the plan. He leaned back against the couch cushions with the posture of a man who had already decided something and was simply informing the relevant parties. So, he said, we all good? I need to make a call, I said. I stepped outside. It was cold. I sat on the porch steps, the same steps I'd shoveled 3 winters in a row, and I called the estate attorney. He picked up on the second ring. I think we're ready, I said. What happened next did not happen fast, which is the part that the movies always get wrong about these situations. It took 4 months. There were meetings. There were documents. There were 2 occasions on which my brother called me, voice escalating in a way that he probably told himself was passion and I recognized as panic. The amendment was valid. The attorney had prepared it correctly. My father had been of sound mind when he signed it, a fact that my brother contested and then stopped contesting when he realized contesting it would require proving otherwise, which would require evidence he did not have. The estate was divided, not equally. The amendment specified 60% to me, 40% to my brother. The house would be sold, proceeds split accordingly. My mother's share of the life insurance payout was protected separately in a trust my father had set up years earlier, specifically so that it could not be redirected. My brother told my mother that I had manipulated my father, that I had spent 3 years positioning myself, working the situation, engineering this outcome. My mother called me 2 weeks after the final documents were signed. She was crying. I let her talk. When she was finished, I said, very gently, that she was welcome to look at the mileage logs, that she could call Medicare and ask for the record of appeals filed under my father's policy number, that I had kept everything, and everything was available to her. She didn't ask to see any of it. There is a particular kind of silence that comes after someone realizes they have nothing left to accuse you of. It is not comfortable. It is not warm. But it is honest, and after 11 years of performance and smoothing and invisible labor and being called a rock by a man who had never once changed a bedpan, I found that I preferred honesty. My brother did not speak to me for 7 months. This was, in practice, not very different from the previous 11 years. He called eventually. He was in a tough spot, he said, financially. Things in Phoenix had not worked out the way he'd hoped. He was wondering if I might be in a position to help out, just temporarily, just while he got back on his feet, just family, helping family. I thought about the 11 years. I thought about the 3 winters. I thought about sitting in my car in my parents' driveway feeling something that didn't have a clean name. I don't think I can do that, I said. He started to say something. I let him get halfway through it. I don't think I can do that, I said again. But I hope things get easier for you. Then I said goodbye and I meant it and I hung up the phone and I sat for a while in the quiet of an apartment that was mine, all mine, bought with money that my father had meant for me to have, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, exactly nothing that needed a name. There is something no one tells you about doing the right thing for a long time in a row. It doesn't feel noble while you're doing it. It feels like a Tuesday. It feels like another pharmacy run, another hold music loop, another drive back from a hospital appointment where the news was neither good nor bad, just more of the same slow diminishing. I did not spend 3 years caring for my father because I expected a reward. I did it because he was my father and he needed someone and I was the one who stayed. But I kept records, and I think that matters, not as strategy, not as leverage, but as a form of honesty. When you write things down, you stop being able to lie to yourself about what is actually happening. The mileage logs were not a trap I set for my brother. They were proof for myself that the time was real, that the sacrifice was real, that I had not imagined the weight of those years. My father understood that. He was not a man who spoke in grand gestures. He didn't sit me down and make a speech. He just asked me one afternoon if I would help him draft a letter, and when we were done with the letter, he said he'd already talked to the attorney. He said he wanted things to be fair. He used that word, fair, in the plain spoken way of someone who has thought about it for a long time and arrived at a simple conclusion. What I've come to understand, looking back, is that the three qualities that carried me through those years were not dramatic. They were quiet. The first was integrity, not the kind you announce, but the kind that shows up in how you behave when no one is watching, when you are exhausted and resentful and still choose to do the thing that needs doing anyway. The second was clear thinking. I did not act on emotion when my sister-in-law said what she said at the kitchen sink. I finished drying my hands. I asked to speak with my mother privately. I waited 4 months for a legal process to run its course rather than blowing everything up in a single heated phone call. Patience is a form of intelligence that gets underestimated. And the third was endurance. The willingness to keep going through something hard not because you can see the end, but because walking away would cost you something you're not willing to lose. My brother called my father's decision manipulation. I have thought about that word. I think what he meant was that he didn't see it coming, and things that surprise us have a way of feeling like they were done to us. But my father had been watching both of his children for 30 years. He drew a conclusion. That is not manipulation, that is cause and effect, plain and simple. I don't carry bitterness about any of it, not about the years, not about my brother, not even about my mother, who is still figuring out how to look at me without guilt reshaping her face. What I carry is something quieter. The knowledge that I lived through something genuinely hard without becoming someone I don't recognize. That apartment is mine. The life I am building inside it is mine. And nobody handed it to me. I earned it the slow way, the only way that actually sticks.